Hi, I'm Andrew, and today I'm going to be talking about shifting between first and third person, or even second person in fiction. So I thought I'd like to talk a little bit about this in the context of the last book I was writing, which is called Stigma Play. So this book shifts between first person plural and second person. So these are kind of unusual perspectives in themselves, so I suppose I could talk a little bit about kind of my thought process behind this. So in terms of the first person plural, this is from the point of view of the committee. So they're kind of like the villain protagonists of this book. What they're doing is they're creating a series of virtual reality simulations in the near future. So they follow different people in an unnamed town in the United States in the aftermath of a shooting spree. And they sort of follow these characters who are all kind of connected in some way with the psychiatrist Dr. Virgil Birmingham. So in terms of the first person plural perspective, this is the committee. So I thought this was interesting in terms of creating sort of a conspiratorial tone to the novel. When they say we or us, etc. In the English language, there's sort of an ambiguity about whether or not it includes the reader or the listener. So I thought it created a particular tone, which I thought was, thematically useful for the book. I suppose it can be technically a bit tricky in terms of the four members of the committee are individuals with their own personality, and sometimes I'm describing something that one of these individuals does. So in that case it shifts to the third person. However, I felt that writing these segments just in the third person lost something that wasn't really there when I had the first person plural. In terms of the second person perspective then, this is for the virtual reality scenarios themselves. So this is the story within the story. These different characters like Virgil Birmingham or his patients or other people who are linked in with him. So for this, I know some people kind of advised against writing in the second person, or sometimes it can seem a bit gimmicky, but I think it's being used increasingly in fiction, and I thought it was, again, kind of thematically useful within this novel, because it creates the sense of the committee trying to have this very immersive virtual reality situation where the person who's in the simulation, is being thrust into this scenario. So in terms of the second person, I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So it can take a little bit of time, I suppose, for the reader to adjust, as within each chapter it kind of alternates between the virtual reality scenario itself and the perspective of the committee. So so I suppose if I were advising people about kind of using shifts between first person and third person, I would say maybe not to do it too abruptly, to have it kind of each chapter maybe restricted to one view, or each chapter segment. I know there are some other books that have taken this approach of shifting perspectives before. So for example, with Real Life by Brandon Taylor, this is quite an interesting book that's from the perspective of a young man who works as a technician in a science lab. So this is generally told in a close third person, but it shifts at one point to the first person in a kind of a flashback from when he was considerably younger. So this is quite an interesting approach, and I think it creates a more visceral sense of perhaps his life when he was that age as well, and perhaps speaks to a certain sense of detachment that he has as an older person as well. Another book that I thought was quite interesting in terms of looking at the shifts in perspective was Snow by John Banville. So again, this is generally in the third person, and it follows a detective who's been called to investigate a murder in sort of the middle of the 20th century in Ireland. So generally it's a pretty close third person following that detective, but there's one segment, referred to as an interlude, where it shifts into the first person, again sort of a flashback, but this time from the perspective of the murder victim, who I suppose has been dead since the start of the novel in terms of its main narrative. So this is following this character who's a Catholic priest, and it's kind of looking at where the motive for the murder came from. So pretty disturbing stuff, but not for everyone. But it was an interesting example, I thought, of a perspective shift. I suppose within those two novels the shift is relatively brief and fairly contained, whereas in the book I was writing I guess it kind of alternates between the two perspectives quite a bit, so it might take the reader a bit of time to adjust, but I think once you get into the novel, it's quite doable to follow it. So yeah, that's some of my own thoughts or my own experience of shifting perspective kind of between first person and second person, or looking at books that have shifted between, from third person to first person. So if you have any thoughts about this, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.